Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my channel. I'm your host, That Creepy Reading, and today I want to present to you 9 more Let's Not Meet stories for your viewing consumption. Now, before I get into the stories, I quickly want to go over a few things before we get into it. Number 1, I need a writer to help me out with a new episode of Fact or Fiction, because there is something I want to do that I simply am not talented enough myself to do it. So if you guys would like to help me out, go to this here, send me an email, send me your portfolio, and perhaps we can work together to create some amazing content. The second thing I want to go into is that my friend wants to start a channel, and in order to do that, we need to get him some channel art. So I figured that a lot of you guys were artists who are watching me anyway, and if you guys would like a chance to be featured on my channel and help him make his channel art, submit to me your portfolio right here. Really, anything helps. This is just some sort of voluntary thing I said I help him do. With that being said, I'm going to give my usual disclaimers. None of the stories here were actually written by me, but rather by the lovely people at Let's Not Meet. So if you guys would like to go show them some love, go into the links in the description below and let them know that Creepy sent you. I'm sure they'll appreciate it. With that being said, me and Mr. Davis want to present to you 9 Let's Not Meet stories. Maybe Easter, and let me tell you, not everyone resurrects. Roll the stories!
Almost Kidnapped by Draco Ive Forscantis. This happened a few years ago during my first year of university. I'm from the UK and I studied in York, which is generally a pretty safe city. I was with my friends on a night clubbing, and as often happens on nights out, I lost them. I was tipsy, but by no means drunk, and at this point my friends weren't answering their phones, and I'd had enough, so I decided to walk home. My house was only around a 20-minute walk from town, and we always walked home, so I didn't think much of walking home alone. I was walking, and this guy starts walking next to me. He was Asian, maybe around 24, so not much older than me. I was 19 at the time. York is a pretty friendly city, and tipsy students talking to other tipsy students you don't know is just the norm. So I assumed he was like me, just another alcohol-infused person making his way home. He started chatting to me about the usual crap, asking what I studied and things like that. We'd only been walking for a couple minutes when he started asking if I had a boyfriend. At this point I started feeling uncomfortable. We weren't in a secluded area, but it was around 3 in the morning and there were no cars or other people around. My mind didn't instantly label him as some crazy serial killer, but a boy was trying his luck, which, again, is pretty common when you're a student. It wasn't really a big deal, but I didn't want to talk with him anymore. We'd only been walking together for about 5 minutes at this point. So now I tell him that it was nice meeting him and talking to him, and that I was at my house. I just stopped outside of some randomer's house and stood there, waiting for him to walk away. But I think he knew I was lying, and he didn't leave. This was when I started to feel really unnerved. He smiled at me and said, "My car is near here. Do you want a lift so I can make sure you get home safely?" When he said this, I became terrified. My chest felt so tight, I couldn't even speak. I just sort of shook my head and mumbled some incomprehensible answer. Next, he comes right over to me, grabs my arm, saying he just wants to help me get home. I remember feeling numb, like I wasn't a part of my body anymore. It felt as though I was watching it happen to someone else, and not me. I always thought I'd fight back and have a strong flight response, but instead I was frozen in fear. I don't remember where the car was or how long it took to get there. I just remember feeling kind of floppy and letting myself get tugged along. The next thing I remember was him opening the passenger door and me getting in. I think he asked me where I lived, but I couldn't answer at this point. He started telling me about how pretty a girl I was, and how he just wanted a nice girl to talk to at home. I was just sat completely still and staring ahead. He then put his hand on my thigh and started stroking it, and then began touching my breast while continuing to drive one-handed. I felt disgusting and guilty, but at the time I thought I deserved it for getting in the car in the first place, so I just let it happen. I remember thinking that I should fight him off or try to get out of the car, but I honestly couldn't even speak, let alone summon the energy to struggle. I had no idea where he was taking me, but I knew we were heading away from the university area. After around 10 minutes, I seemed to unfreeze and it really hit me what was happening. I genuinely thought I was going to die in that car. I asked him if I could get out and he just smiled at me. I'm only 5'1" and small built, so I don't really stand a chance of overpowering him. And honestly, I was still too scared to try anything. At this point, my mobile started ringing. I'd forgotten I'd even had a phone. I never answered anything so fast in my life. It was one of my housemates who I was on the night out with, asking where I was and if I wanted to meet her in a takeaway. I didn't even look to see how the guy was responding, but the next thing I know, he was pulling over and telling me to get out of the car. I had no idea where I was, so I walked around looking for a street name and rang a taxi. I was sobbing and I told the taxi driver what happened, and he told me that I had to tell the police and even offered to take me there, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I didn't want to stay in that car any longer than I had to. I got dropped home and promised I would inform the police in the morning. I've never told anyone else what happened that night, and I blame myself for being stupid enough to walk home and for not being strong enough to fight. I pretty much willingly got into his stupid car and let myself get assaulted. I could have been raped or murdered, and it would have been all my fault. The whole incident has made me very distrustful of men. I have depression, anxieties, and issues with self-harm which were triggered by what happened. Please, let's not meet again.
All because of a blanket. By Bitchin' Donuts 127. This happened last July while me and my boyfriend's family were on vacation in Carolina Beach in North Carolina. Every year, my boyfriend's family rents a pretty nice beach house for the weekend around July and takes a vacation. This is my first year being invited. It's beautiful, a lovely peach color, 4 bedrooms, and only a block off the beach. I'm not sure how to explain this, I'm sure there's a term, but the house is on what seems like stilts, and you can park your car underneath the house. It's exposed and completely open below the house, so it's not a garage, but I have no idea what other word can feasibly describe a room where you put a car. We parked our car down there. There was a table for hanging out, the laundry room, and also a private enclosed outdoor shower down there as well. The house had 2 upstairs porches, just a walk up from the steps from the car to get to the porches/doors in the beach house. Now directly across our beach house is a little mom and pop restaurant. To the left is a gas station, and to the right is a 24/7 laundromat. The main porch is facing the restaurant. You can see all those places from underneath the house and the porch. It's pretty open. This is pretty normally quiet. It's a tourist town, and family has been coming here for years and has never had an issue before. I swear, this is all important information for later, so please continue listening. It's our last day on vacation, and the landlord of the house has always been good to the family. So we wash all the bed sheets for him, including the heavy down comforter that is needed to go to the laundromat instead of our washer and dryer. Boyfriend's mom and I take a blanket over to the laundromat around 10 p.m. We stay out on the porch to watch the laundromat and make sure that no one comes in and steals our blanket, while also having a nice comfortable seat to listen to the TV in the house. We're checking on the blanket, and it's taking way longer than originally thought. It needed to be washed twice, on the longest setting, to get clean, apparently. By the time we put it in the dryer, it's 1 a.m. Somewhere between 10 and 1, a maintenance man shows up and is working on a few of the machines. He's nice, says hi, how are you? Don't use 3 machines as they've been running subpar. And we go back to the house and the family joins us, all while sitting on the porch, drinking, talking, and simply having a good, nice family moment, talking about how we're about to leave and how it was such a good time. It's 2:15 a.m. now. and my boyfriend asked my mom and me to go check on the blanket and run it another time if necessary. I have a bad feeling. For some reason. Blame it on the booze. Blame it on my boyfriend's dad telling ghost stories. Blame it on my boyfriend filling my heads of ideas that were particularly disturbing at the time. But I had a bad feeling. Now, one thing I want to let you know is that while I'm having this bad feeling and having second guesses, my boyfriend's dad is also a pretty huge guy. And I think to myself, man, he's pretty scary as hell if you don't know him. So I ask him, and he says fine, and runs over to run the thing a little bit longer. Now, the boyfriend and me are pretty avid marijuana smokers. His family doesn't care, so we go to the outdoor shower, lock the door, and start toking away. There's a seat in there separate from the shower part, and we just begun to chill there. A few minutes later, we hear loud banging from the laundromat. We go out to see that the maintenance man is still there. We say whatever and go back to smoking. At exactly 2:27 a.m., I was playing on my phone, and we hear a scream in a panicked voice. What the fuck? What the fuck? What the fuck, dude? That's all we could hear. We head out of the outdoor shower and see a man booking it across the street towards our house and cuts through our yard and then runs to the backside of the shower. The maintenance man runs to his car and whips out of the laundromat, turns down the road away from our house and hits the parked car and continues screeching down the street and finally wrecking. We can't see the car, we just heard a loud crash. We go upstairs to everyone on the porch and we're like, did you just see that? What just happened? We call the police. They're there within 5 minutes. One cop goes down the road to the accident. There's a shoe and some other weird things on the road, and the laundromat door is still hanging wide open. The police start taping everything off, and being so close, we hear them on the radio. We hear that there's blood everywhere and that they need to call others in. 2 more cops show up. There are now 4 cops in this laundromat parking lot. We give them our story. They cannot physically write most of us as witnesses, as we were drinking. But they still want to know what we saw. They started searching for a weapon where the one guy ran, which was mainly through our yard. Me and my boyfriend are freaking out because not only do we smoke a bud right there, but we were also smoking right when the guy ran past us. The cops don't mind. They don't keep us updated or anything at all. We get some looks from them for the smell, but they didn't say anything. After they complete their investigation, we see a cleaning crew of some sort come, and they lock the laundromat doors. After that, we got our blanket. We see in the newspaper the next day that a homeless man came in and stabbed the maintenance man, and was trying to rob him in the process. When the maintenance man got a good swing on the guy, he ran out away towards the beach. The police found a homeless guy a few blocks away. I guess the maintenance man was trying to get to the laundromat owner's house. Not sure why. Also, a few blocks in the other direction when he got into his car. The maintenance man got taken to the hospital and turned out he was okay. The homeless man obviously got taken to prison. I'm really glad that I asked my boyfriend to go check on the blanket because I just miss being in that laundromat during this whole ordeal by less than 20 minutes. After all the commotion was gone, we felt like we deserved a big blunt and a few stiff drinks. We locked the doors and went to bed. Nothing else happened on the rest of our vacation, but one thing I do want to state: crazy, stabby, homeless man. I'd prefer not to meet again. Men in the Woods by Nordic Nonsense. Recently, and by recently I mean like 8 months ago, I'd never had experience like that before this. I'd moved into the South Pacific and gotten the hiking bug, so I try and get out to new locations as much as I possibly can with what work is eating into my precious little time. This happened about 2 weeks ago. Since I live in the South Pacific region, it gets mighty hot. Driving by all the insane hikers indoors, unless it's at night. Of course, I'm not a masochist, so I try to do all of my hiking in the early hours of the morning or late in the evening when it starts getting cool. I've never been afraid to go hiking by myself. I did it when I lived in Oregon, and I never ran into any problems with it. But my island isn't in my friendly home state. I always carry pepper spray. And when I used to go hiking in Montana and Wyoming, would sometimes carry a handgun to ward off anything I couldn't take on, whether it be a bear or a bear of a person. But I'd always gotten off considerably lucky and never had to use those types of things, so being cautious wasn't really my type of dealio. I got to the trailhead at about 6:30 in the evening. The trail was called 1,000 Steps, but in all honesty, it was mostly just a walk straight down a cliff and then a grueling journey back up. I didn't want to go, but my dog, Mad Moxie, needed to be walked, and I hadn't done a hike in quite some time. I could probably do this hike in my sleep, as I'd also done this one many times before. The first thing I noticed when I pulled up was an old, rickety, rusted-out blue pickup truck with a big plastic tarp pulled over it. It was there mainly to keep the rain out of the bed. These are pretty common on the island, affectionately earning its name the Guam Bomb. I don't think, or at least I didn't think much of it at the time, as I hooked Moxie up and started heading down the trail, trying my best to ignore the mosquitoes that were making a quick and loving meal out of my exposed neck. Heading down the trail was relatively easy, avoiding banana spider webs. I felt the stress of my day-to-day work slowly unwind as the underbrush grew darker and night approached. I made it all the way down to the water's edge when I noticed a man standing about 100 yards away. It was dark enough now that I could only see his silhouette, so I had no idea if he was looking at me or at the water, but I simply chose to ignore it. I instead pulled out Moxie's ball from my backpack and threw it for her a couple of times to get all of her wiggles out. After some time, the man started walking over to me. Maybe about 10 feet away now. I'm 23 years old, and I stand at about maybe 5'6". And this guy was just a couple of inches taller than me. But most of the locals were on the smaller side. But something about him just felt weird. "Evening," I greeted the man, and looked down to Moxie, who had just returned from running after the ball. I stooped down to pet her now sweaty head, as the man's eyes were now trained on my dog. I then spoke up. Can I help you, sir?" "Pretty dog," he responded mildly. "You alone?" I have my dog," I said lamely, trying to sound a lot braver than I was feeling. "I'm never alone." I tried to emphasize on the fact that I had my dog with me, but the man seemed to be unfazed by my statement. "Oh. Well, have a good night." With that, he turned around and started walking back towards the trailhead. I watched his shadow disappear into the trees and waited for about half an hour before I started to walk back myself toward the path. My mind was on high alert. Moxie pulled me through the trees and right up the cliffside. The crickets pierced the night as I climbed the steps, illuminated only by my flashlight. My hands were full with Moxie's leash on my light, but
You could bet your buns that I would have my extra hand with pepper spray in it should I have a third arm growing out of me. Finally, my light pierced the trees at the top, and I practically booked it up the hill. When I got to the top, I nearly shit myself. The rusted blue pickup truck was sitting in the parking lot still, but the passenger side door was practically touching my driver's side door. Inside the car, I could faintly see two men sitting in the cab. I could feel them watching me. Slowly, I approached my car, walking over to the passenger side as I could. I kept Moxie with me as close as I could as I opened the door and crawled over to my driver's side. At that moment, the door of the pickup truck flew open and my dog started going apeshit, barking at the two men who were now outside of their car, trying to break into mine. Heart in my chest, I ran my keys in the ignition and tried to tour out the parking lot so quickly. However, they were quick enough to break my driver's side window and nearly take my mirror off. I called my mom as soon as I got home, and she begged me to call the police. Unfortunately, police here on the island aren't as vigilant as the ones on the mainland. So thefts, car thefts, muggings, and other debaucheries, as I learned from my coworkers, were quite common here. Earlier this month, another girl accidentally disappeared from that area without a trace. And it makes you wonder if the man in the blue pickup truck didn't have something to do with it. If I hadn't had Moxie with me, I might have been mugged, or worse. If I learned anything from this experience, it's that for my other friends out there who are also hikers, please keep pepper spray on you. Go hiking in groups, and always let someone know where you're going. It might save your life one day. And to the men in the pickup truck, let's fucking not meet again.
Neighborhood kids attacked me, and then their psycho dad threatens to kill me. By Deserted 15. I love listening to scary stories and figured it's time to maybe share one of my own creepy encounters. A bit of a warning, this is going to be long. Throughout my life, I've experienced many unusual and often unpleasant situations. For privacy reasons, I don't want to give too much information about myself, but I will say that I'm a 20-year-old girl now living in Ireland, where I have lived for 5 years. I grew up in a small Eastern European country, of which about 40% are Russian and of Russian descent. Even though almost everyone in my country spoke fluent Russian and much of the population had Russian relatives, ethnic tensions in the country were high. It wasn't uncommon for you to receive a lower salary or worse treatment in shops and other public places if the place was run by natives. It's because of this I believe I was singled out as a target in this particular story. That and my feeble appearance, as I've always been quite short and skinny. My neighborhood, like any other, consisted of many blocks of Soviet apartments, remnants of the USSR, rotting away but nevertheless housing hundreds of people. It was a good enough neighborhood, all things considered, and I would not have called my family particularly poor. However, the building we lived in was rather bleak. The hallway was always dark, stank of piss or sometimes other bodily excretions. The building was quite tall and had an old creaky elevator which smelled no better than the hallway itself and often got stuck or broke. This, however, was still more favorable than climbing the even darker sets of stairs which often had homeless people sleeping on them or groups of teenagers gathering to do drugs. The layout of this place is unimportant, however. I believe this description will set the scene. After a year or two of living in the building with little occurrences aside from stumbling upon the occasional stoner with a knife trying to rob me for drug money or drunk passed out in front of my apartment, I started to notice two native kids hanging around the neighborhood, a girl and a boy. At first they never spoke to me and I paid little mind to them. However, I would often notice them staring at me as I passed by or from a distance as I played with other neighborhood kids. These kids were weird to say the least. They spoke a limited amount of Russian and isolated themselves from everyone else, just watching me. Despite them being very similar looking, nobody knew if they were related or just two weirdos living in my building who found each other, but I remember always assuming they were brother and sister. After a while of the not-so-casual staring, they began to harass me on my walk home, tease me, push me, and generally attempt to get on my nerves in what little Russian insults they knew. I had a rather thick skin, so this didn't bother me too much. I would either completely ignore them or fight back with what I thought were rather witty comebacks, but these kids were relentless. I began to wonder why they decided to randomly pick on me, as I had never said a word to them before and had never really paid them any significant amount of attention, but decided to settle for their just a bit weird explanation. Nevertheless, this is all just teasing, right? Kids being kids. One day on my walk home, the strange duo were on my heels as usual. The boy making some crude comments about my nationality and how I should go back home to Russia, as well as other unrelated insults, while the girl snorted and laughed her ass off. I did my best to ignore their behavior, not feeling in the mood to dignify them with a clever comeback this time. However, it became increasingly difficult as in frustration, the two suddenly became more aggressive than usual. All the other times this went on, they would just give up and leave me alone after a while, walking in the other direction, but this time, to my surprise, they followed me into my building and into the poorly lit, stinky hallway. Still ignoring them, I pressed the button for the elevator when I felt the boy roughly grab me from behind. I was in shock. The girl joined him, bending my arm in an incredibly uncomfortable position behind my back. "What the hell are you doing?" I screamed at them, as they began attempting to drag me to the almost black staircase, telling me to shut the fuck up. I struggled, of course, not understanding what had gotten into these two. I mean, I knew that they were weird, but this was something else. This didn't feel like childhood bullies or kids being kids. I believe those two had something sinister in their minds. As I struggled against their grip, trying to break my way free and towards the elevator that now arrived on the ground floor, a middle-aged woman walked into the hallway. A look of confusion at the sight before her on her face, she asked, "Is anyone going up?" Desperately I breathed, "I am, please," reaching for the elevator only to hear the guy snarl, "You're not going anywhere." To my surprise, despite the pure desperation in my voice and the fact that I was fighting two seemingly older kids due to my size, trying to drag me away, the woman didn't offer any help, didn't give out to the two kids, didn't even ask what the heck was going on. She just shrugged her shoulders and walked into the elevator. What was going through her head still makes me curious, but I'm assuming this was probably due to assuming this was nothing serious because of our age, or maybe her not wanting to get involved any more than she already had in order to avoid trouble. After all, our neighborhood wasn't the safest, and it's best to just stay out of trouble if you can. At this point, I became surged with adrenaline, partly from my desire to get to that elevator and away from these two, and partly from anger at her refusal to help me. It's amazing what the human body can do when faced with a potentially dangerous situation. Using all my strength, I whipped around and slammed the boy harshly into the wall behind me, immediately making both the girl and boy let go of me. I could tell that the two of them were shocked as I was as to what I had just done. As I said, I was a small girl, but I felt as though someone else had possessed me at that moment, as if I wasn't even in control of my actions. All I knew was that I had to get away. As soon as I was let go, I ran to the elevator and managed to make it inside before the door closed. The last thing I remember seeing before the door slammed shut and we took off was the girl's shocked expression as she stared at me, surprised at what I was capable of. I wish I could say it ended there. A few days later, I was confident in my ability to defend myself against those two and was pretty sure they would not attempt to attack me again, or even go near me. My relief, however, was short-lived. A friend of mine knocked on my door at the usual time I would go out on a free day, asking me to hang out. I, of course, excitedly agreed, and as soon as I was ready, we headed out into the elevator. As previously mentioned, the elevator itself was not all that sturdy and easily broke down. But that's not the only thing that made it extremely unsafe. If you were a child and were taking the elevator alone, especially in a building as tall as ours, where there were many floors, you never knew what that person that got on with you turned out to be, and what they could do to you, especially if the elevator suddenly got stuck. This wasn't something that happened so often, of course, that it prevented us from using it and taking the dreaded stairs. We got on without a worry in the world and pressed the button for the ground floor and began chatting about nothing in particular. About 4 floors down, the elevator stopped, letting on a burly middle-aged man. Just the sight of him was intimidating. He had a sunken face, long black greasy hair, a curly beard, sweat stains under his arms, and his belly was so big it took up most of the room in the tiny elevator, pushing my friend and I into the corner. We fell silent. At first he said nothing, just stared at us two as the elevator door closed. I could tell that much like myself, my friend had an uneasy feeling about him and what his intentions with us were. Then in a deep, hoarse voice, he says slowly and calmly, "You think you're so tough, don't you?" It was more of a statement than a question, and I could tell that it was directed at me. Suddenly he pressed the elevator stop button, screeching it to a halt, reached out and grabbed me by the fringe. He pinned me against the wall of the elevator, still holding onto the fringe, and began to pull up. I could feel some strands of hair ripping out of my skull as I was being lifted slightly, however, not enough for my feet to lose contact with the ground. I squealed in pain as my friend watched in shock, cowering further into the corner, unable to do anything. "I can be tough too," he sneered in a slightly sarcastic tone. I began to try and make him let go of my hair, but to no avail. The more I moved, the more my fringe ripped out and the more painful it became, so I just stopped struggling and attempted to stand up on my tippy toes as much as I could to release the tension he put on my hair. "You think it's funny to hurt my son?" For a second, I had no idea what he was on about, but then I realized. The boy I had slammed against the wall in an attempt to get away must have told his parents what happened, most likely neglecting to include the fact that he attacked me first. Or maybe he did, and his father just didn't give a shit. He didn't seem like a very reasonable man after all. "I know what floor you live on. If you ever touch my son again, I will put a knife through your throat in this fucking elevator. Do you understand me?" He hissed at me. Before I could respond, the elevator began to move again. Someone must have called it to another floor. He narrowed his eyes at me and let go of my hair, standing back and acting as if nothing had happened. As we stopped and another person got on a few floors down. The rest of the ride was spent in silence. I don't know what was scarier, the fact that this clearly insane man was threatening my life, or the fact that his equally loopy son stalked me without my knowledge to find out what floor I lived on, what my routine was, just so he could get his psycho dad to threaten me. And for what? My friend and I tried not to speak about it again, but whenever I saw those two kids again, they just kept their distance as they have before, grinning at me.
At the Toy Store by You Know What? This happened when I was about 4 or 5 years old. I was at a rather large toy store with my dad and sister, who was 2 years older than me, so that I could pick out a birthday present for a friend of mine. My dad and I were looking at the Lego section that they had available, while my sister was shuffling around, bored out of her mind, and at some point she simply wandered away. I was looking at a box of a castle set, wishing that it was my birthday coming up, when my sister returned and tugged on my dad's arm. "What is it, sweetheart?" he asked without looking away from the box he was holding. I think he also wished it was his birthday coming up too. "There's a man. Never mind, he's gone now." My dad stopped, looked at her, and then put the box back on the shelf. What man?" he asked. "There was a man who asked if I wanted to come see his puppy, and I said that I would have to ask you first, but I don't know where he went." My dad took the box out of my hands and put it back on the shelf, then took my hand in his and put another hand around my sister's shoulders. "Well, let's go find him," my dad exclaimed and began leading us towards the checkout/exit. Now, like I said, the toy store was rather large and we were walking very fast. When we got near the checkouts, my sister pointed out the man who was just about to leave the store and said, "That's him." I could see how she recognized him from behind as he had very long hair. It was halfway down his back. I remember him having a black winter coat on, which was strange because it was a pretty warm day. We walked even faster until we were at the nearest checkout, and my dad said, "Stay here with the nice lady for a second," referring to the cashier. He then ran up behind a man who was now almost out of the door, threw his hands on his shoulder, and I remember hearing what happened afterwards. My dad spun him around to face him, then begun yelling, "Where's the damn puppy? Where's this weird puppy you wanted to show my daughter?" People around started looking over at the commotion. My dad continued, "You wanted to take my daughter to go see your puppy. Where is it? I want to see this puppy too." The man, stammering and stuttering, was trying to get away, but my dad had a firm grasp on this guy's shoulder, turning his head to where you were standing. My dad yelled to my sister, "This the guy who asked you to see his puppy?" My sister silently nodded her head yes, and then looked at her shoes. Clearly, she was not quite comfortable with this situation. I think she thought she was in trouble or something, and I didn't blame her. My dad was yelling really loudly. "Is this puppy in your car? Where's your car? Is it over there?" He then pointed out the glass door into the parking lot. "Or is that your car? Is that where the puppy you want to show my 6-year-old daughter is? Tell me." I remember thinking that if he just let go of the guy, he could lead us to the puppy. Before I knew it, 3 men in yellow jackets had to come. There was a word on their jacket, which I couldn't read, though I knew all the letters. SECURITY. My dad let go of the man, and the yellow fellows had held him instead. My sister was crying by this point. My dad walked back to us, once again taking my hand into his own and putting the other around my sister's shoulders. He asked the cashier if she had a phone that he could use, and she took us to the office, and he called our mom to come pick us up, then assured that my sister that she was not in trouble. In fact, she was in the least amount of trouble she had ever been in the history of the world. Simply by coming and asking for his permission to see this puppy was the best thing she could have did. I asked him if we were still going to see it, and he just looked at me and said, "Sorry, son. Puppy ran away." Our mom came in just a few minutes, and as we were leaving, there were police cars pulling up. "Are they going to help find the puppy?" my sister asked my mom, but she said, "No. They're here for something else." The other day, after reading through a lot of stories here, I remembered this incident and asked my dad about it. Apparently, the cops searched the car and they found rope, duct tape, a knife, pliers, and a hacksaw. At the guy's apartment, they found a whole shitload of child porn. My dad and sister testified at his trial, and the guy got over 20 years. Which means, barring other circumstances, he's out now. I also asked my dad if my sister knows about the stuff in his car. He said no, and to keep it that way. So, if there's ever been a situation where the word "let's not meet" applies, I think this would be it. The man's out now, and let's just say I don't believe in the idea of people ever changing. So, crazy child porn man who almost potentially kidnapped my older sister, let's not meet again. Completely Oblivious by Lone Lady. This past Thursday, things are rather routine at the supermarket I work at overnight as a price checker and a display manager. A coworker was supposed to be in but called off earlier in the day, so I was alone. I didn't mind it though. Working alone has its advantages for an introvert like myself. The night goes well. After minimal price checking and creating a couple of new displays, I'm out by 2 a.m. I head home and wake up later that morning. I'm about to take a shower when the manager calls me on my cell phone and asks me if I can come in for a few minutes. I agree, slightly confused about why, but headed out after showering and getting dressed. When I arrived, I saw a state trooper parked in the parking lot of the supermarket. Something must have happened, and I started to clue in at this point. I walked inside and go back to my manager's office, where I find the manager sitting down at the table with the trooper and the coworker that was supposed to be with me the previous night. At first, I thought I was going to be busted for something I didn't do, or something that my coworker did, or maybe we were both screwed, or maybe, I don't know. As I took my seat, the trooper and my manager asked me a few questions regarding last night. I explained that it was all routine and uneventful. The manager told me that he had something to show me. I sat there and watched as he turned towards his computer and pulled up some security camera footage. I sat in silence for a few seconds, wondering what I'm supposed to be looking at. When pulled up, one of our outside cameras pointed to something, and I felt my heart drop. I looked in surprise as I watched him play the camera footage. It showed a man dressed in all dark clothing with long hair carrying what looked like a chulo, walking up to the store from the highway right from the entrance that I must have forgotten to lock. My heart sank as my manager pulled up several different camera recordings. I watched the cameras, and to my horror, I saw myself doing my night's work while being completely oblivious to the man inside with me. There were moments while my manager fast-forwarded where I would see the man peering around corners at me, watching me while I worked. I felt sick as I recollected my memories from before, walking past aisles, in and out of the restroom, and even walking outside on my breaks while being unaware that someone was silently in my vicinity at all times. I was surprised to learn, though, that I didn't seem to be the main focus. After a while, showing me a bit of footage, the manager ceased and explained that the man was seemingly walking around like a zombie around the store, not stealing anything, not stalking me, just walking aimlessly. Having only watched about a couple minutes of footage, I still felt like I was gonna vomit and ask if I could leave. When a trooper asked if I knew who it was, I declined and stated that I never saw him before. My manager told me that he's going to have the assistant manager work with me for the next week or so not to worry about anything. As I got into the car and left, I couldn't help but wonder what the man's motive was. He wasn't looking to steal or do anything, nor was he focused on me the entire time. What creeps me out is not knowing. And the only real message I can impart with you viewers today is that sometimes, even when you don't realize it, even when you don't have that feeling that someone is just around that corner, someone might be. And it's up to you to remain vigilant. The Kidnappers in the 1990 Camry. So I saw an article on here earlier which gave me flashbacks to my encounter I wanted to share. To give you an idea from where I'm going on. I grew up in a nice middle-class neighborhood in Maryland, about 15 minutes from the border to DC. We never had any real serious crimes in our neighborhood, just the typical petty theft from people leaving their car doors unlocked. It was a cloudy, chilly Saturday, October of 1993. I was 8 years old, and my brother Jamie was about 12, I think. We had just left his friend's house after playing street hockey on his driveway for several hours, and we had to get home about maybe 5:30 p.m. His house is a couple of blocks away from the elementary school, and basically across the street from the school, it is a pretty big sized park area. Its entrance had a fence and a path that separates the fence along the street. The fence continues into the backyard to a house which sits in a cul-de-sac. My brother and I on the left side approached the four-way stop sign and noticed a 1990 Toyota Camry sitting there. We didn't think anything of it and walked down the sidewalk towards the school. I was talking to him about Art Monk, the Redskins, and how we used to back to write in the stadium, and hoped to get an autograph. I realized that James was oddly quiet during my idea of writing to the Redskins. I asked him if he was listening, and he said, "Keep talking. Act cool, act normal, don't look back, okay?" Confused and nervous, I responded, "Okay, what's going on?" During my talk, my brother was paying attention to this Camry that was driving very slowly behind us. We again played it cool, walked at our normal pace. As we were just about to pass the school. I continued to talk while we were approaching a big field that sits directly across the entrance of the park. My brother put his hand on my chest, which made me stop immediately. He then turned back to glance at the driver. Now, I wasn't sure if it was to see how the car would act, if it wanted to make a move across the street, or if he was trying to see the license plate. However, when we stopped, the car stopped. This time, I got a good look. The driver was a female with brunette hair that ran all the way down to her shoulders. She almost looked drugged. She never blinked. She looked straight ahead. Not at us, not to the side, straight ahead. The passenger was the intimidating one. He was red-headed, long hair, and had a very angry look. His eyes are watching us intensely. To be honest, he looked like a comedian carrot top, an evil-looking carrot top. After getting a good look and realizing the situation we were in, I started to get nervous. I was breathing heavily and my legs felt numb. I looked at my brother and he just said, "Keep walking." What was weird about this day is that there were no other cars on the road. It felt like a ghost town all of a sudden. It was just us and them. We continued walking forward to the next block when the car all of a sudden started merging in the other lane. He was going to block us off and then who knows what. My brother, being older than me, was faster. He knew it. I knew it. Starting straight ahead, I'm looking at our option, and my brother said, "On the count of 3, run, okay? Run as fast as you can and follow me." Before I could even accept a deal, he started his countdown. 1, 2, 3, and then he's off to the races running. I'm trying to keep up. The car slams on the accelerator. James is trying to run across the street when I try to do the same. The car almost cuts me off and I feel a bumper against my pants. The Camry now has to back up and accelerate again after us. My brother made a move across the street to the right side and I follow as fast as I can. I realized he was making a run for our friend's house. He gets there and starts ringing on the doorbell like crazy and starts banging. The Camry catches up. The passenger gets out of the car almost as soon as it stops. My friend's dad opens the door, James rushes in, and the red-headed man gets back in his car seeing the older gentleman open the door. I dive right through the door too. My friend's dad runs out towards the car, which is now speeding off, yells something as he tries to get the license plate. At this point, I'm crying, my brother's crying, my friend's dad is shaken up, and I'm trying to catch my breath. Even though we live a block away, we had our dad come pick us up. We called the police, wrote a report, and they said to keep their eyes open. On Monday morning, we notified the elementary school about our ordeal. However, they didn't do much to let the public know. It wasn't until the next week that they sent out a filer to the rest of the parents, and cops begun patrolling the neighborhoods. During the week, 3 other cases happened with that white Camry following children. One was even more terrifying than my experience, where the kids were jumping through backyards because the redhead guy was chasing them through the park. After that, a week of disturbances, everything stopped. I never heard of arrests. I don't know if we moved to another city or if they moved to another area to try to abduct kids. All I know is that they terrified our neighborhood for about a year, and it took a while for things to get back to normal. The brunette, I always wondered what her role was. Why would she participate in a terrorizing, menacing act? Either way, her face and that ugly, nasty, red-haired man are etched into my brain. Hopefully, he's gone, rotting away in jail, or something worse. Because let me tell you, this dude is a scumbag. Carmel the Maintenance Guy by Mysterious One. Years ago, I was still a young man. I became friends with a couple who lived a couple doors down, the maintenance guy C and his wife. My daughters called him Carmel because it was close to his name and it seemed to amuse him. Anyway, shortly after we met, Carmel's wife left him and somehow I became the shoulder to cry on. He would tell me about how he parked in front of the house where she was living for about 4 hours to give her roses, despite her telling him not to contact her under any situation. No matter how much I told him he was never going to win her back by refusing to respect her requests, he kept doing things like this. Eventually, he gave up on trying to woo her back. I suppose we remained friendly, but I didn't see much of him after that. I did ask him for a lift to go see my boyfriend who was in the hospital. I did not have a car, and it was a hot summer day, so I didn't really want to walk 2.5 miles each way. He dropped me off, and after my visit, I walked home as I originally planned, arriving in time for my ex to drop off my daughters, all 3 of whom were kindergarten age or younger. The following day, I was out of cigarettes. My youngest 2 were napping, and my 5-year-old was awake. I admittedly didn't use good judgment when I walked across the way to my neighbors to bum off a cigarette. Even I could hear my daughters if they called out. I was gone for about 3 to 5 minutes. As soon as I got home, my daughter told me that Carmel called while I was gone. I called him to see what he needed. Hey, why didn't you call me to come get you yesterday? He asked. I told him I didn't need a lift home, and after a minute or 2 of conversation, I hung up. As I did, my daughter said, I don't know if you want to know, but I think you want to. I asked what she was talking about. When Carmel called yesterday, he said he likes to take off his clothes and play with himself, and he asked if I wanted to watch. Obviously, that was the end of my acquaintances of Carmel, but it was not the end of the story. I filed a police report, but they couldn't really take much action because they said the crime had not been committed. All they could do is keep an eye on the man, and if something else happened, make sure it's recorded so that I could, well, get more than just cause to get the man under arrest. Okay, I told the apartment manager what he was doing, and he was fired. However, in the 3 months that followed, my middle daughter started saying odd things when she woke up at night. She'd always awaken at night to go potty or get a drink in her semi-conscious state, and then always settled back down and slept intently. But now she said things like, Carmel talked to me at the window, on several occasions. I always went to go find out if he was there, but I never saw anyone. I wondered if it was just her imagination, even if it was, but every time she said it, she told me that he said he would be her friend if she let him in. And it happened every time she said that he was at the window. It was scary, but I felt confident enough. After all, I was always at home at night, and would do anything to protect my daughters. These things never happened before midnight, and I was always up later till then, or at least later past then. Then one night, I hired a babysitter while I went to a dance with my boyfriend. We got home at around 10:30 or so, only to find that the police were at my apartment, and an unidentified male had tried to convince the babysitter to open the door for him. She said that he yelled at her when she wouldn't open the door, and that he'd walk around the patio and started waggling his tongue at her through the window. So she called the police. My oldest daughter said it was Carmel. So even after 2 police reports, it did not end. The final incident was when I awakened to a loud pounding at my door. I looked through the peephole, and it was a police officer. I invited her in, and they said that they received a phone call about a man looking into one of the windows of my apartment, my daughter's room. She said the caller had apparently startled him, and he ran, but the caller was able to get a license plate number. Do you know a man by the name, and they spoke his real name. That was the last time he messed with my family, but it wasn't the last time I heard about him. My boyfriend ran into him at a convenience store a few months later and said Carmel acted like nothing happened, and that they were just great friends. So, Carmel the stalker, abuser, pedophile. Let's not meet again. Stranger at my door at night, and it gets scarier the next morning. I'm a small girl in her early 20s who lives alone in a smallish condo/apartment with her cat. On the second floor of the building where I moved in a few months ago, there are 2 doors that one must enter in order to get inside my apartment. The first one's outside, which leads into the entry of the building. The second one, obviously, is my apartment door itself. Tenants have keys for the outside door, which has only one lock, whereas the actual apartment doors have both locks and a deadbolt. Otherwise, a visitor must be buzzed in to be allowed inside. For some clarity, there are 8 apartments per building in my complex with an outside door on either side of the building. Mine is closer to the back and is situated directly above the currently empty apartment. My downstairs neighbor to the left is my age, the only neighbor I'm close with, and is often away staying with her boyfriend. This means while I technically live others, my home is technically isolated. There is an outdoor light situated next to the door, but I noticed when returning home that the bulb had either been broken or burnt out, and hadn't thought to contact the maintenance guy to fix it. As it was late and I was tired, there hadn't appeared to be many others in my building, as the parking lot on my side wasn't particularly full. I was taking care of a few chores around the house around 10 p.m. Friday night, running the dishwasher and folding laundry. I'd had a long week at school and then had arrived home probably an hour to an hour and a half before. My cat was keeping me company as I puttered about. It's hard to hear much outside while the dishwasher is going, and I was genuinely distracted, but barely noticed a soft rustling sort of sound outside. It didn't seem to be strange aside from being repetitive. I wasn't really unnerved by this point, but I was constantly anxious anyway, so this wasn't anything new. Besides, even if I wasn't anxious already and was actually suspicious of the noises, I would have been too frightened of the dark to look outside the window anyway, at least to that side of the building. This might very well have been totally unrelated, but I think it's worth bearing mention. Fast forward to a little while later, and I'm standing in my kitchen, or standing at my kitchen counter, working on reports on my laptop. Sitting again kills the butt. Over the sound of the dishwasher, I hear a soft knock on the door, upon which my cat bolted from the bedroom. Unsure at first if I really heard anything, I went and stayed still and waited for a moment. There it was again, quiet, but a little longer and faster. This made me get pretty uneasy, as it's late, but my first thought is that it might be one of my neighbors. I approach the door quietly and look through the people. As I mentioned, the only neighbor that I know is a young woman who lives downstairs, but I'm familiar with what all the other ones look like. The man is standing outside, completely unfamiliar to me at all. Tall, wearing either dark blue jacket, Caucasian with dark hair. He didn't look too unusual, he just looked unfamiliar. What was unusual, though, was how close he was standing to the door. Even distorted through the people, he was still so close that I would guess him to be standing square in the mat on the hallway, leaning his face slightly to try to stare at the people himself. There was an odd sort of energy in his stance, if that makes any sense. I immediately felt extremely unnerved and glad that I made very little noise when I walked. I backed up about 3 feet from the door and waited. I'm not totally sure how much time passed, but he probably stood there for a couple of minutes longer before I heard him go downstairs and through the outside door. Now, I've had a neighbor from the downstairs knock on my door in the evening before to ask me if I was experiencing power outages, which he was. He brought his wife with him, probably to reassure me or something like that, and stood a reasonable distance back from the door after knocking firmly. This is exactly what this strange guy didn't do, which is why it set me on edge. However, trying to convince myself I was making a big deal out of nothing, I told myself that he had probably been in a similar sort of situation, but was far from immediately uncomfortable to consider the answer to the question. I just decided to listen to my gut and not answer. I texted both my mom and one of my male friends about the situation, and my friend offered to come keep me company, but by that time, I had already talked myself into some nervousness, and I assured him that I was fine. I went to sleep about an hour later and woke up having mostly forgotten about it. Shit got weird the next day though, only the context of what I saw in the morning and the knock. I had agreed to accompany my mom and her boyfriend yard sale hopping that morning in some nearby neighborhoods. I should mention that it was Saturday, and they were picking me up early around 7:30 a.m. My mom gave me a call from her car when they arrived on my side of the building to let me know to come down. I grabbed my bag, went downstairs and outdoors, and as soon as I opened the outside door, something clearly was wrong. The handle turned very loosely, the door opened very easily, and upon shutting it behind me, the handle itself completely fell out of the hole. Looking back, I wish I'd taken a picture of it because it was a little hard to describe, but it had been messed with. The outside portion of the handle was held in place with some screws, and that part was completely missing. The lock component of the handle was also missing. Essentially what was left was stripped, and it was just a stripped handle with a hole in the middle where the keyhole should have been. Both those parts, when I searched the surrounding area, grass and sidewalk, were nowhere to be found. Essentially, it had been thoroughly fucked with. My mom, having heard about the knocking incident from the night before, was not cool with this at all, and I insisted that I report the incident. I contacted the maintenance and the police, but as there were no cameras situated near my apartment, or even near my door for that matter, I'm not particularly hopeful about getting any sort of responses out. I talked to my neighbors who were obviously made aware of the vandalism. Nobody was at home or awake around that time, and while some people did report hearing strange footsteps in the hallway, they were none able to see the man that I described. Perhaps I'm overthinking it, but what makes me more nervous is that it makes the approach seem more targeted and less random, as if he knew it was me in there. For what it's worth, the outside door handle was replaced very quickly that afternoon, and currently nothing has happened since.